Friends, did you know that somewhere around in here, in the hub, is where the first baby ever was born inside of Disneyland? Did you know there was a time that an alligator got loose inside the rivers of the Jungle Cruise and came after the cast members trying to put the boat back on the track? And today we're going to explore who exactly owns Tom Sawyer Island. Am I standing in Disneyland? Am I standing in California? Or am I standing in the sovereign state of Missouri? 24 years later, Y2K may seem like a big joke to all of us that were old enough to live it, but Disney had a major battle with Y2K to ensure that every guest would be okay during the computer apocalypse. Friends, just when you think you know everything there is to know about Disneyland, here I come with the Disneyland Oddities series, sharing with you some of the more offbeat, some of the more odd stories in Disneyland's rich history. Just when you felt like you've heard it all, there's always room for a new Disneyland oddity to blow your mind about the long, crazy history that is Disneyland. Let's get started with episode 2 of Disneyland Oddities. I'm Brickey, and I cannot wait to share with you some of the craziest stories you've ever heard about Disneyland. Tom Sawyer Island wouldn't open up with Disneyland in 1955. It would open up a year later in 1956. And along with it would bring a grand opening ceremony that would then create one of the greatest Disneyland urban legends ever. Is Tom Sawyer Island a part of the great state of Missouri? Walt's original ideas for naming the island would be Mickey Mouse Island or possibly Treasure Island, but ultimately at the end of the day he decided to go with Tom Sawyer Island, which is how the great state of Missouri gets involved in trying to take ownership of Tom Sawyer Island here in Anaheim, California, inside of Disneyland. This is one that keeps coming up time and time again. As many people say, I'm pretty sure that Tom Sawyer Island is part of the state of Missouri. Tom Sawyer Island being near and dear to Walt Disney, as this would be the only attraction that Walt would pretty much design himself. So therefore, Walt wanted to make a big deal about its grand opening in 1956, as this would be the new offering for the second year of Disneyland. To celebrate the opening of the new attraction, Disneyland had catfish flown in from Missouri, and folks were encouraged to have a fish dinner over at the old plantation house, which would sit about right here on the edge of the rivers of America. But to further sell the idea of Tom Sawyer Island, they had 2 children visit Disneyland from Mark Twain's hometown of Hannibal, Missouri. The kids were playing the role of Tom himself and Becky Thatcher. And it seems that the 2 kids that would come from Missouri to Disneyland would bring along with them a gift from the governor of Missouri. Phil Donnelly sent a letter over to the then governor of California, Goodwin Knight, declaring that this island were to become property of the state of Missouri. How the locals say it. The letter asked to take appropriate action with will of cause the Tom Sawyer Island in Disneyland, California, to be deeded to the sovereign state of Missouri, the only true and rightful possessor of any and all Tom Sawyer Islands in the world. So that is where the urban legend comes from. But that's not where it stops, because many people took that literally, that they were asking for Tom Sawyer Island to become a part of the state of Missouri. However, a dedicated fan who had a burning quest to know, is this Missouri? Is this California? Is this Disneyland? Did lots of research, wrote a letter to the state of Missouri asking for an audit of all actions that the governor had taken in the year of 56, 57, and 1958, looking to see, indeed, was there any paperwork showing that through the state legislature that the governor had annexed Tom Sawyer Island into the sovereign state of Missouri. And to come to find out, the only thing that they could find during that time period that the governor had declared was a Tom Sawyer Week. So indeed, this is part of Disneyland, is part of California, but only Missouri, in the heart of the sovereign state of Missouri that would birth Mark Twain, one of the greatest American authors and minds of all time. Therefore, proving that there is no paperwork, that it was just a joke, that this would become a part of Missouri. And you know, is the world round or is the world flat? Perspective is everything. But for our second oddity, we will go from the first full year of Disneyland to 3 years before the new millennial would strike, as Y2K would put fear in Disneyland executives. If you happen to be younger than the age of 24, this next one might not mean a lot to you, but believe it or not, at the turn of the new millennium, going from 1999 into the year 2000, there was a huge concern about Y2K. Essentially, there had become this idea that nobody had thought to write the computer programming to roll over from 19 to 2000, which created mass hysteria. What would happen when the computer apocalypse would strike at the stroke of midnight? And Disneyland, simply being Disneyland, decided that they could not take the risk for the computer apocalypse to make anything go wrong on any of their properties. Disney was worried about this like every other major corporation, but knowing that if the computer apocalypse known as Y2K would strike a Disney park and anything would go wrong, that would probably be one of the greatest examples that the media would latch onto. See, it even broke the Disney magic. And there is a bizarre obsession when things go insanely wrong at the theme parks because many people believe that this is a place of escapism. So Disney wanted to make sure that for all the people that wanted to celebrate the new millennial at a Disney park, they'd be able to do so with safety, which is exactly where our second Disneyland oddity takes place. Disney went hard. I mean hard. Getting prepared for Y2K. Making sure to not wait till the last minute, Disney got started preparing for Y2K 3 years earlier, where Disney would launch extensive research, work with tons of outside companies, and try to test predict every possible outcome of how all of their computers ticking over to the year 2000 could possibly affect the guest experiences on all of their properties. But to be sure nothing would go wrong, over this course of 3 years, Disney would invest millions of dollars in making sure their guests would be safe on every single Disney property around the globe. But at the stroke of midnight, at the end of 1999, when a new millennium would come into all of our lives, Disney would roll through it with extreme safety. All of their time and research and development, millions of dollars, had proven that they had weathered the storm and everybody was safe that wanted to celebrate a new millennium inside of a Disney resort. However, they spent a lot of time and effort to ensure the safety and security for all of their guests and to make sure Disney would not be one of the examples of Y2K going awry. But truth be known, I don't know that it really went bad for anybody. It seems that Y2K was one of the greatest urban legends of the end of the 20th century. Hey friends, if you'd like to help support the channel, make sure you click subscribe. And the best way to help me keep creating 3 videos a week is to support the channel by grabbing our Walt 1901 hoodie, available in the link below. Now let's get back to the rest of our Disneyland Oddities episode 2. Friends, I'm sure by now you've heard the story that Walt Disney always envisioned that his jungle cruise would be full of real, live, breathing animals. But once it was explained to him that live animals will be probably napping, not active, inconsistent, and cost a lot of extra money, Walt was like, maybe we don't do the live animals. But I'm sure, as you know by now, if Walt Disney was anything, Walt Disney was very, very persistent and decided that if he couldn't have his attraction full of live animals, he wanted at least one section that would have something that was living, breathing, showing people the jungle experience he wanted to promise them. So the compromise was out front of the Jungle Cruise, close to where you would get on to the attraction, Walt had an alligator pen put in. So yes, technically there was a time when there were live animals at the Jungle Cruise. But let me explain this Disneyland oddity because as all of these stories, it didn't go according to plan. So they would rent the alligators from a local establishment called the Buena Alligator Farm that was not too far away from where Knott's Berry Farm was at. And Walt arranged for these alligators to live in a pen right at the edge of the attraction. So as people were waiting in line, they would see real animals, which then would possibly convince them that all of the animals inside were real as well. 3-foot-long alligators were placed in a pen right out in the front of the Jungle Cruise. But as guests would wait in line, they started to realize that people's kids were not only throwing popcorn at the alligators, but also there was a souvenir cart out front that sold small rubber animals to get people jacked up on being on their adventure. And come to find out, the kids were throwing alligators at the alligators. So the folks that were responsible for the alligators' well-being started to notice that they would have kernels stuck in their teeth and also little pieces of rubber that would get in between their teeth, notched into their gums, where the alligators had rubber alligators stuck inside their mouth. You can't make up the stuff on the Disney Oddities video series. Like, these stories are so wild. And in another strange twist of events, the alligators made hissing noises. Hissing noises because I'm guessing they were pissed. People thought that the hissing noises were because they were robotic and that was pre-programmed in there. And then when people would see the sign "real alligators," they started to believe that the alligators inside the attraction were the real one. So even Walt going out of his way to create this experience kind of backfired and did the exact opposite of what he intended. But one could say at least people thought there were some real animals in the attraction, so maybe Walt succeeded after all. At the end of the day, alligators gonna do what alligators gonna do, and they were able to escape from these small pens. And when they escaped, guess where the first place they went was? Yep, you guessed it, the first place they would escape to would be the rivers of the Jungle Cruise. Therefore, out of the pen, free at last, God Almighty, free at last. And this created a couple of problems. Disney would have to shut the attraction down, bring the alligator trainer back, who would make a weird hissing noise that convinced the alligators that he was their mother, and then they would swim back to him, he would catch them, and then they'd be alligator free again. And then the other problem this would create is divers have to occasionally get inside the rivers of the Jungle Cruise. When the boats back in the day would get off the track, they would have to dive in the water, place the boats back on the track so the ride could be operational. The divers wanted nothing to do with swimming through the river when they thought that there could also be alligators in there coming after them, which has got to be a big difference between Orlando and Anaheim, because people in Orlando be like, I'm not afraid to swim in the water with an alligator. Now, wrong species, but it is believed that somewhere in this area is where the pin would be at, and that would make sense because if the pin was right here, the line is right there, and access to the water is directly behind me. So, little Disneyland Oddity shout out, please do not feed the crocodiles other little rubber crocodiles or popcorn. Tired of having to shut the attraction down because of alligator evacuations, and also worried that the alligators were going to choke to death on all the things that kids were throwing at them, the alligators were returned to the Buena Alligator Farm, and alligators and real living animals inside of the Jungle Cruise were a thing of the past. But it was a thing for a while, which is such a great Disneyland oddity, because I've often heard the story, Walt wanted real live animals in there, and I never knew that Walt's dream of real animals came true. Our final Disneyland oddity in episode 2 takes us back to the 4th of July weekend, 1979, where the Salcido family wanted to celebrate the 4th of July weekend at their favorite place, Disneyland. But something a little bit unpredictable happened to this couple. It seems that when Eli and Rosa were riding on the submarines, I don't know if it was the pressure of the water or her being 9 months pregnant that made her feel like, uh-oh, I think I'm starting to go into labor. So once they got off of the submarines, they decided to start heading over to the First Aid Center on the edge of Main Street, USA. It seems Rosa thought that she had a couple more days until the couple's child was on the way, but it looked like this kid really wanted to go to Disneyland. So the Disney ride operators called ahead, letting First Aid know that there was a pregnant woman on her way. And the Disneyland First Aid has nurses there on duty to help guests with whatever comes up. They had also called an ambulance. But the walk from the subs to the hub was a little bit too much for Rosa. Rosa said as she walked across Main Street, she started to feel 3 big pains and then knew what was getting ready to happen. It seems that Rosa was able to get to a nearby bench, not being able to make the complete journey. Where somewhere behind me, Rosa was met by 2 nurses from First Aid were able to meet up and help her go into labor and have her baby somewhere in the hub area. Not exactly sure, but I would love to know where that exact bench is at. And by the way, bench being my favorite ride, can't think of a better way to come into this world. And it would be somewhere in this area where little baby Teresa was born, 6 pounds, 10 ounces, the first baby ever born inside of Disneyland, but Teresa wouldn't be the last. But baby Teresa did start an urban legend of what some mothers-to-be would anticipate would happen if their baby was born inside of Disneyland. Let's break apart the myth. If your baby's born here, does it get an annual pass for life? Of course, baby Teresa and her mother Rosa were taken to a nearby hospital where on July 6, just 2 days later, baby Teresa was visited by Mickey, Donald, and Goofy and presented with an unbelievable gift. The gift was a birth certificate for being born inside of Disneyland, and it was labeled Disneyland Birth Certificate number 1, as Teresa was the first baby ever born inside of Disneyland. And like a traditional birth certificate, it had all of her vital information on the interior of the birth certificate, but then the outer border was ornated with Disney characters all around it, giving this child truly a special birth certificate keepsake. No good deed goes undone, and this birth certificate started a rumor that if you had a baby inside of Disneyland, that child would be granted a lifetime access to the park, which is absolutely, positively not true. Now, for baby Teresa being the first one here, who knows? But for anybody else, absolutely not. And Disney would work for years to make sure that people didn't think that this urban legend was true, trying strongly to discourage anybody from deciding, I want to have my baby at Disneyland. But one woman that decided that that rumor was indeed fact and wanted to roll the dice had her husband run into first aid, which is directly behind me, and the husband declared frantically, my wife is in the bathroom, she will not leave, she's getting ready to go into labor. And the husband even ratted her out, was like, she's doing this because she thinks that the baby's gonna get a lifetime pass to Disneyland. So then cast members went and met with the woman in the restroom and begged her not to have the baby in the bathroom at Disneyland, assuring her zero reward for such a risky birth. They were able to convince her to come to her senses, and then she would get on an ambulance and have the baby at a nearby hospital. However, just 5 years after baby Teresa was born in the park, later on in 1984, expecting mother Margarita Grandios thought, I can wait it out, I can do this. However, sorry for laughing, this is too funny. However, while Margarita waited with the couple's 2 young sons, while her husband rode Space Mountain, she could tell that nature was taking its course and had to come over to the first aid center. And when her husband got off of Space Mountain, he was no longer a father of 2, he was a father of 3. Margarita gave birth to another baby girl inside the first aid center where 3 Disneyland nurses assisted her in her birth. As of date, there are 4 babies to be known to be born on Disneyland property. In 2002, a baby was born in the back offices of Main Street USA, where a mother went into labor. And then in 2012, a baby would be born at the Toy Story parking lot bus stop. Oh, Toy Story bus stop, baby. So close to being born inside of Disneyland. But interestingly, all 4 babies born inside Disneyland and in Walt's personal life are all girls, meaning that the Disney namesake is pretty good at bringing more women into the world. Oh, I just had the realization that baby Teresa is 45 years old now. Hey, happy birthday, baby Teresa, this summer. Hope you have a good one. There you go, friends, 4 Disneyland oddity stories from inside of Disneyland. Just the kind of crazy things that happen in the living, breathing city that is Disneyland. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you check out episode 1, where I show you where the Disneyland audio animatronic graveyard lies. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you, and I appreciate your time. Hope you felt like today's video was worth it.